as we go through. There it goes. So welcome everybody. This is really exciting. Here we are kicking off 2023 with our first idea jam of the year. My name is Alexis Milligan. I am presenting tonight with my lovely colleague Gillian, who will introduce herself later. I'm sitting here in Dartmouth, Nova Scotia, and I'm just wondering if people want to pop into the chat. Where is everyone calling in from? Where are you sitting right now in the world? It's really nice to kind of see where we're all phoning in from. I know that here I am in Dartmouth, and I know Gillian's in BC, so that's kind of fun too. Think that we're truly a national network at this point, which is really exciting. Just a couple of rules for the house in terms of people. If anyone it's your first time here, first of all, you don't have to say anything at all. This is an idea jam, and sometimes ideas cook along in our heads. So there's no pressure to participate. But if you have something that you want to contribute, if an idea comes up and you're finding the conversation is really getting you excited, you want to put up your hand, there's a couple of ways you can do this. There's a raise hand feature, which is down in the reactions. Literally just go beep. There is just literally raising your hand in the screen, and so we're going yes here. There's also the chat, and the chat has been a really useful tool for us. So there's sometimes a really interesting kind of multiple conversations happening at different times where we have people speaking, but then there's things happening in the chat. The chat's also really excellent for sharing resources, websites, links, papers, articles, people's names, all the rest of it. It's a really great resource for us. We save them and we post them on our website with the video from this evening. So it's a great resource to reference and go back to. You can see all of ours then since we started in September 2021, which is crazy to think about. Okay, so that's all the housekeeping that we have for this evening. So we're going to start. I'm going to actually hand this over to Gillian, and she's going to kick us off.
Sure. Hi, everybody. It really is nice to see everyone and to kick off the new year. I think it's early enough in the new year to still say Happy New Year to people. It is true. We are from coast to coast, and maybe from coast to coast to coast. I live on the unceded ancestral territories of the Kwantlen, Katzie, and Semiahmoo First Nations people, which is Vancouver. And I know we've had a lot of rain lately, but I know that you're gearing for a big dump of snow there on the other coast. Is that right, Alexis? Mm-hmm. That's good. So yes, you know how this works. I'm just going to plant a few seeds followed by Alexis. And I have to say, nothing more fun than collaborating with someone in CNIC for an idea jam. So have loved this. We kind of came upon this topic because we're both struggling with the same thing. And we're curious about your thoughts on it as well. So we realize and feel like there's so many problems with words. The limits of language are really limiting we think how imagination is taken up in our population. So the word problems is, how do we understand the word imagination? How do we understand the word creativity? Because how those are understood can limit us and lead to continued sidelining of those important life-wide processes. In terms of titles, we had quite a few. The problems with language, ... debunking the myths, overcoming, removing obstacles, unearthing beliefs. But it all comes down to the ongoing ways in which both Alexis and I are challenged when we say we work with imagination. And what does that mean? And, oh, obviously your work has nothing to do with mine then. And so my pet peeve is that as soon as I talk about imagination, people instantly, except for those in the room today probably, envision fairies, glittery things, unicorns, and young children. And I'm so done with that. So over to you, Alexis.
I love this. So this is where, again, Gillian and I come at this topic from two different places, because my frustration is that I am an artist by trade my whole life through dance and theater. And always, it is assumed that creativity is the purview of the artist, that the artist is the creative, that if you have creativity, you must be an artist, or to be creative must somehow include the arts disciplines. And they don't. And it was interesting when we were looking again at this topic. It's like, how do we, it feels like there are these gatekeepers, the people who are creative, the people who want to be creative, and the people who fight for creativity as a way of being, of living in the world. And the idea that it's creativity is somehow inaccessible, and that sort of, oh, I am not creative. Oh, I'm not, well, imagination, I don't know. So this is where we kind of came together, and we are looking at what is the association to these words? How do we associate with the words creativity and imagination, and why are they so difficult? So when we talk about it as this group of people, we know there's a way that we can pass and share this information out. We really believe. But there are people companies and individuals who want to tap in, and they want to get in, and they say, we need creative people at Google, and we can't find them. So where are they in the world? Well, it's like, well, they're everywhere because everybody's creative. But it's this thing of, what is it that limits us from breaking out through these barriers and this language association? So it was interesting because Gillian brought up this question as we were having this discussion, which was, is a taxi driver imaginative? And I sort of said, well, it's interesting because I would think, as a creative person, yeah, taxi driver's work is imaginative. If you're a taxi driver, you have to be imaginative. You have to imagine every route and every way you might encounter people and all the things that you have to keep going. But does that person driving the taxi perceive themselves to be creative? Is that something they would want to share with other people, or do they feel that they can't? So what holds us back from acknowledging that our work is imaginative if it's not in a creative field? So these are our big questions for this evening to idea jam on. Gillian, do you have anything last that you want to add?
It might make sense for me to share the story. I thought I wouldn't share, but I will share. The funny bit of a contradiction in my own life. And so the challenge and the struggle is real. I'm an imagination researcher, but I'm not the creative one in my family, apparently. And this is my own sense of what's imaginative and creativity. I have to tell you about my brother, but don't tell him. He'll just get all swollen headed about it. So creative. So this guy, he's taught himself how to play guitar, just, a bit of a hobby. He's taught himself how to do magic to the level of being able to do all kinds of magic shows in all kinds of venues. And he creates intricate pieces of art using styrofoam as his medium. You have to imagine interlocking wheels. His latest one has 14 interlocking wheels, and it's a clock, and each wheel is run by the engine of a CD player. And I did mean that, CD player. So massive creativity. And so my internal voice is, well, I'm not creative. What do I make besides a bad meal once in a while for my family? And then I have to start to think about, well, I know I am. I just express that imagination in other ways. But if I, as an imagination researcher, feel like, oh, I'm not that. I only dance when the lights are out, or if Alexis is having a workshop.
Or if I'm bullying you at a conference.
Then anyway, so that's my piece, is that I think if we're being honest with ourselves, we've all either are looking or thought of this question for ourselves. So.
Okay, a lot to process. The chat's going already. So maybe let's start with, what are your associations with the word creativity and imagination?
I see Dean has his hand up.
Things I would like to differentiate. When I usually use pottery as an example, the potter sits down and makes a bowl and then makes the same bowl again, makes the same bowl. I consider that a learned craft. When the potter finds either a new use for the bowl, or finds a new way of making that same bowl, or finds a new bowl to make, invents one, comes up with one, then I see that as being using the imagination and using the being creative. But I differentiate learning a skill. So your brother plays guitar, whoopee-doo. It's really nice that he does that. He learns magic, great. Is he just following by rote what he has learned? That's not using the imagination. That is not, to me, I'm talking about how I perceive it. That is not being creative. But taking the styrofoam and using it in new ways and taking something from the imagination that he visualizes and putting that into reality. I see that as use of using his imagination, right? As being creative. So your introduction, Gillian, is pure creativity. You are taking things that you have observed and you're bringing words together into sentences in novel ways that you haven't learned from somebody else. Language is inherently creative. And lots of hands, so I'll stop there.
I think Goran, then Blaine, then Trevor.
Sure, thank you so much. Thank you for such a wonderful question and a great provocation. I think as many of us here, I too have been wondering, what is creativity? And so I so appreciate the question. I think from my perspective, creativity has something to do with the process of going inward into the self, as it were, and then the connection to the outer world, quote unquote, the world of actions and of expression, so that journey of going sort of inward and outward is mediated by imagination, where imagination has something to do with the possibility space for the expression of that movement between the inner and the outer worlds, as it were. And, to a previous friend and colleague, the extent to which that movement is more unique or more particular to ourselves, maybe perhaps we call that more creative versus a kind of a repetition, maybe perhaps of something else. But nonetheless, it's still part of a kind of a creative process.
Blaine.
Thank you very much. I teach a course on imagination, creativity, education. So, the question of what is imagination and what is creativity are the two questions that begin the course. I like to think of imagination as the conceptualization or the manifestation of wonderment. And that whole idea of things beginning with curiosity, the desire to know, and then the desire to make some kind of order out of what we're trying to learn. Vygotsky said that there are three principles of imagination, and they involve the emotions, they involve experience, and they involve reality. And he says that imagination is experience, experience is imagination, and each of them loop on the other. And I think that's important to realize that when we're talking about imagination, it's deeper than just simply mental images or conceptualizations or manifestations. I would agree with Goran on the last point that I think that creativity is process. Imagination is the ideation, if you will, and creativity is the process that brings that, I like his phrase, that brings that from the inner world to the outer world. And I think that's spot on. So thank you.
Great. Yeah, Trevor.
Yeah, so I was driven so crazy by this question. I did my entire PhD thesis on conceptions of creativity, which I've researched since the first use of the word, before the first use of the word creativity, all the way up to now. There are lots of conceptions. I mean, the word creativity is from our versions from the Bible. Create, though, is a Roman word to make something new, but not something new that is interesting. It can be, I created a new numbered corporation. Problem is, we still use both these words. I created a mess, right? That's not creativity as the way most people think, but the same root is in there. And all of these, I'm going to try to be really short because I can go on for 18 hours on this. But beneath all of these uses of these words are the goals of the people or the groups trying to use them. So corporations will say, we want creative people. Oh, do they want people breaking rules? No, they want people coming up with solutions for economic problems, right? You could say we want creativity in elementary school. Oh, what do we want? Do we want those people coming up with new ideas? No, we want them to be creative together. So the idea of doing a creation together. So like people in a choir will say they're being creative. Are they making a new idea? No, but they're being creative and they're creating a social moment. They're creating a work together. Totally, they're not always agreeable, these conceptions. That's why they're so confusing. And most people end up backing the one that they back. They might not be consciously aware that it's their political or their feeling of the reason for being. It really goes back to that. But those are what gets us into these situations. Because I was doing creativity workshops in schools, and every teacher took me differently depending on what their kind of internal thing was, right? Is it cooperation? Is it, I'll just do one quick example. So I talked to somebody once, and she said she was doing a creativity exercise with students, that they were all, it's the squares, right? You have a mosaic and then like a picture, and then you recreate it in a mosaic. And one kid didn't follow it, right? And so one kid, instead of recreating it, made their own drawing. And she was trying to demonstrate that, look, we were trying to do a creative thing, but there's one student didn't do it. And that means we don't have our creation. And I said, well, or you could look at it as that is the one student who is creative because they didn't follow your rules. Both are right. There's not a right or wrong here, but it depends on your purpose behind it. Okay, I'm going to be quiet now, but.
Could I possibly, before we jump on to Gerard, if you don't mind, just because it's connected, in your research, have you noticed people differentiating between like small C creativity and big capital C?
Oh, I've seen that. I'm not
What
into
is
it.
that? Is that worth reading more about? It feels
So
to me
it's
very simple.
It's an attempt to separate these things, but it doesn't separate the purpose. I'm a professional comedian, musician, and I don't buy any of that. My whole goal when I do teach people is to get rid of that concept that there's a difference, because it shuts people down. It makes them go, I can't do this, right? I also teach future teachers how to teach music, and a lot of them are terrified because they've been taught there's this difference between creative people and uncreative people. And my personal feeling is it's totally bogus and manufactured, and to support a structure of big, it's trying to carry on the idea of genius, and they all happen to be males and white for some reason. I'm not sure how that happened, just an accident. So that's kind of fallen out of popularity, but I think it's a legacy of kind of that ranking, a hierarchical type of view. Once again, you can't disprove it. It's just their version of what creativity is, because there's so many conceptions and they don't all coexist together. Some of them are antagonistic, some of them overlap, and some of them don't.
Thank you so much. Appreciate it. And I think a few of us have asked for the link to your PhD thesis or dissertation.
Yeah, I'll see if I can find it and put it in there. I'll do a little search.
Thank you.
Okay.
Gerard?
So one of the things I was thinking of, and especially after hearing Trevor, is that I think there's a dogma that's attached to the word creativity and imagination. I've been involved in the arts for a long time myself. And I've encountered people in the arts and sort of the creativity gurus. One in fact pissed me off so much, excuse my French, but it was his way or the highway of the creative process. So it was kind of like, so I think one of the issues at play is kind of that dogma that's attached, and some of that comes out of I think it actually comes out of the formal education system, but some of it comes out of our own kind of egos as well. So I'll leave it there.
Christine.
Hi, thank you. Really interesting discussion. So many different points we could jump off of. I just wanted to address the big C, little c thing, because I think in the spirit in which that was originally written, the concept is not so much to make people uncreative as for people to find where their creativity lies. and that, a big C creative, if that's all we look to, then of course we're not going to hit those marks. We're just regular people. But Ron Bagetto, who's the one that sort of identified these things, was doing it in a way so that everybody could find their place, and that it wasn't that you had to be that big creativity guru like Einstein or Picasso or Maya Angelou. It was find your own place and be comfortable with that. And so I mean, that's my understanding of where that came from and how it was used, not to shut people down, but to actually open it up and realize that there's a spectrum of creativity. And initially I had a question for Gillian right off the bat, because what intrigued me was Gillian, when you said you're an imagination researcher. I've encountered creativity researchers. I don't know if I would classify myself as one, but I've heard of that. I've heard of the possibilities researchers, the futures researchers, all these different things. I've never heard of anyone say an imagination researcher. So I'm wondering if all of us would have similar books in our library of creativity, imagination, wonder, possibilities, futures, and these are just different names, but we're reading similar people as far as so I was just curious to get a glimpse of your library.
No, I love that. For sure. I've just started saying that because it just is quicker than saying I do research and then what, and then learning, and then and then imagination, and then the blank look. So it tends to get people's attention, but I think you're right. I think we're all probably reading those people willing to explore the sort of the ambiguous spaces of the not yet, the possible, the unpredicted, etc. For sure. Thanks for that.
The chat is exploding. It's fantastic. I don't know if anyone's had a chance to kind of follow along. But Cheryl, if you don't mind, I don't want to put you on the spot. You certainly do not have to unmute. But it's just really interesting, your point. Would this be both working together? Someone's dreams of a structure, right? So how does that play in? I don't know if would you want to just expand on that a little bit more about what you just popped in the chat? It's a really great. Oh, just a second. You're just muted. I'm going to unmute. I'm going to ask you to unmute.
Can you hear me?
We could, and now we can't. So maybe one.
Now?
There you go. Yep.
Yeah, I think sometimes we get tied up with the words and what they mean when the two processes work together quite comfortably. I mean, like a lot of people would tend to dream first, or fantasize first, or think about what if, and then it's the idea of that, and that's the place, like playing. And then you come down to the problem solution. Where could this apply to the problem being presented? That is, what can we do for quality of life for older people in this example? And then taking that interesting place where everything's fluid and then applying it to the challenge or problem is where the two work together quite comfortably and compatibly. I don't know, maybe there is a lot of interplay, I guess, between the two of them, I would say. Which I don't know if that answers your question.
No, I think that's great. It was just more, again, just to sort of hear the thoughts. Christine, you want to respond to that?
Yeah, just a thought popped in my head there that I love what Cheryl said about the words, the interplaying. And I think probably all 37 people on this call are comfortable with playing. We're happy to play. We'll experiment to play. And I wonder if it has to do with who we're talking to, which word we use. So it comes back down to the language that was brought up at the very beginning of this talk. If I'm talking to my dean at school, I might use the word creativity or rather innovation, because that's the hot word that dean or president or whoever will latch onto, because their understanding may be linked to economics, may be linked to, you know, competitiveness in the marketplace. Whereas if I'm talking to, you know, my 3-year-old grandson, I might use the word imagination, because it has, you know, just that fantasy element to it in my mind, and maybe in his mind. So I just wonder how much our language has to be shaped by the audience. And it goes to Trevor's point of purpose. What is our purpose in talking about what we consider creative, artistic, imaginative? You know, is it to create a new course and get that dean to agree to it? Is it to just have fun in the backyard, and who cares what happens? Do we change our language that way? And I can speak for myself. I know I have, depending on whether I'm dealing with someone who, if I use the word artistic, and I see two very dear colleagues here, Cara Lee and Glennis, who know me quite well, and I think we would use the word artistic for certain things, but yet we know in certain circles, as soon as we say the A word, that's it, forget it, you know. And the C word is a little bit better, because there's so much research out there on leadership with creativity and, you know, innovation and creativity. But, you know, it still depends and times change.
I think this is really interesting, tapping into this again, this idea of association and how we see it, because I totally agree. When I was writing my master's thesis, I struggled a long time with whether or not I was going to include the word theater in my title. And Mary knows this, she was my supervisor. And I was like, there's no way I can get a broad spectrum of a population reading this if it has the word theater in the title, because it's not even going to be on their radar. And I really struggled with that. But it does make me think again, like David, you've just said, like innovation is more acceptable, and creativity is kind of like still a bit dangerous, but artistic, you know, there's no way, right? So in that sense of how are we finding our way, navigating, reaching out to draw in those individuals or those groups or organizations that may give us that blank stare, that may not themselves be able to imagine, or their own associations with the language, imagining what theater might encompass, or creativity might, the breadth and the depth of what that idea is. So I'm just curious in terms of these strategies, that it feels like if we have innovation, we kind of latch onto it. And it was something, David, you brought up earlier too, is about this sort of this poverty, this lack of language that we also are missing ways of describing. And so everyone is using, I think, small c, big C interchangeably. I think it's small c is becoming big C and big C is becoming small c. I think it's however anybody wants to be able to use it. So I'm curious as to whether how are you working to push the envelope of getting it out there? That's my curiosity. Do we have to just embrace using the word artistic, and people just have to get used to it?
Well, in my own work, one thing I've done is to try to encourage a different metaphor for imagination, because I'm sorry if you've heard the story before, but if you Google images of imagination, you get balloons and fairies, lots of glitter and very childish things, or full fantasy, which is fine, but full fantasy things. And I think that language and those images need to be replaced. And so I've done a bit of publishing around the notion of imagination as soil. It's the soil out of which things emerge. Soil can be cultivated. Soil is universal. Soil is culturally specific. It works quite well, I think, Obviously, no metaphor is perfect, but it does convey a much more significant, a much more appropriate way of thinking about imagination. So it's one of the things I'm trying to do, is to get people who I think really misunderstand imagination and as a result ignore it in their own lives more, to consider how it's much more important than that, much more significant.
Blaine. You're muted, Blaine.
You, Alexis. I was just wondering, based on the comment that was just made, whether we've ever considered that imagination might be thought of as intelligence, or as, yes, as intelligence, as a domain to itself. Because it struck me that on some of the comments that are being made, we're seeing imagination as being more than simply being defined by language or terms. It's much deeper than that. It's much more embodied. Just a thought.
There's that thing of the surface of the word and then the depth of how we understand. Yeah.
That's
And-
right. Yeah.
Yeah. So that there's, when we're looking at, and I guess that's where my curiosity is it feels that, you know, we've talked about this before in these idea jams where we all kind of bang our heads against the same wall trying to get these ideas out, what the potential, the human potential of creativity, and understanding what that can draw out when we access these creative parts or recognize these creative parts of ourselves. I still use the parabola faces exercise that you talked about, like as a reference point all the time. And it's that thing of going, my association, it changes the way that I think about something when I have that experience with it. But until I have that experience with it, my perception of it is only what my past experiences have taught me. My past experiences have taught me that I don't draw. So I'm not. So as again, it's this idea of having these that somehow creatives are gatekeepers, but yet creativity is so in demand. It's like one of the top recruitment, you know, lists on the top lists of things that people are looking to recruit are people who can play. But it seems to be deficient at the same time. And I know we talked about the education system as well, but how do we like smash down the gates?
Well, I think you make an excellent point there. And, you know, because creativity is also one of the considered to be one of the major tenets of the 21st century, you know, in terms of skill development and all the rest of it. But I think what happens from my perception and my reading of a number of articles and whatnot on it is that too often we step past imagination altogether and we immediately go to creativity as if it were a construct all by itself, not realizing that creativity is based on something that has gone before. It's not an a priori factor in itself, but it's an a posteriori factor. And I think that sometimes we ignore that fact when in the writings or when we're talking about creativity, we step right past imagination, we step past wonderment, we step past curiosity, you know. And so I think that complicates the issue greatly.
Trevor.
Okay. I think a lot of the times is people saying a word and they're both saying the word, but they're not thinking the same thing. That's why, so most of my research, creativity and education, creativity is one of these wonderful words like leadership or character. Everyone can say it. Everyone has this idea that it's a wonderful thing. None of these people are thinking the same damn thing. If you talk to them, like for me, that was part of my problem as I was getting to schools. And then I was hearing all this rhetoric on creativity is building skills for the 21st century so students can think. And I didn't want them to do that. I want them to have fun and make something that means something to themselves. I'm not in this classroom they're doing that every other hour of the day, they're being trained to do skills for the freaking 21st. I wanted them to make a thing that they liked, right? And that's what I brought in before I did the research, of course. And that's why I was so confused with what I was doing there. I didn't want them to be following the rules of the structure. I wanted them to be questioning them. So you have corporations saying they want creativity. They don't want the version of creativity I'm thinking of. They want the thing where the person solves the problem and that makes them a bunch of money. And so the rhetoric we're talking about, and I think this is slippery. I shouldn't use that metaphor. There's a danger in always changing your language, right? So the word innovation, for example, never sits well with me doing creative stuff, because innovation is generally loaded towards an economic output. That's usually what it's used for. So when you're an artist and you're starting to do an artistic, creative, imaginative workshop, but you know underneath it's because someone wants to make money from it, you're getting into some, there's clashing conceptions there, and it only works if everyone pretends it's working and it's not really working. That's why corporations see creative people and why schools say they are encouraging people to fail, but they're not, because you can actually fail in school. Like, everyone should fail. It's wonderful. Oh, you failed. Oh, I thought failing was a great thing. You just have that poster on the wall. Anyway, so people aren't talking about the same thing when they're using these power. Everyone wants these words. They're great words. Leadership. What does it mean? Is Trump a great leader? Well, he has a whole bunch of followers. He must be a great leader, right? No, that's not what leadership. Once you dig into these words, you find out people are hiding their agendas behind these words. And we only agree because it's easy for us to all agree on something like that. Anyway, I'll shut my mouth now. Okay.
That's great. So anyone else? This is great. The chat is on fire tonight. It's great. I think so. Our other question. So Gillian and I were, sorry, I'm just also reading the chat as I'm talking. The other thing. Oh, Lindsay. Lindsay and then Sharon, and go for it, Lindsay.
Hi, thanks. I was just thinking about language and how difficult it is for us to create new language when we see a need for it. I mean, that the gap propels us to want new language, but I mean, we've wanted non-gendered pronouns for decades, and I have. I mean, I remember in the 90s thinking it's time for non-gendered pronouns, and we still haven't come up with new words for that. I mean, we use a plural pronoun, and that's what's normal now. But I would love to add language and make new words. It seems something that we continually fail at.
Great. Yeah, Sharon.
As an artist, I'd like to add 3 words. I'd like to add the word unique, observation, and intuition.
And in terms of just being able to use those in a way that expands something like creativity. So out more of that.
As a visual artist, those are 3 words that are very much a part of what I create.
So the other thing that Gillian and I were curious about is the role of CNIC, of the Canadian Network for Imagination and Creativity. And how can we work with, again, we use this language, the words imagination and creativity are in the title. So, I think many of you have been coming to these idea jams for a long time. So we are part of this network, this growing network. And so, Cheryl. So I'm just curious as to what is our role? How can we help? What is there that we can do as a network that really addresses the depth of these words and not just as a presented surface? What is that action that we can take? we can sit with this for a little bit. Glynis.
Hi, thank you very much. I'm really interested in the idea of the words and the meanings and what was just said, I'm sorry, by Sharon about being unique, observation and intuition. I think one of the problems is the fact that I think creativity and intuition still have a very elitist element to them. And until we can get we always say everyone is creative, but how do we help people understand that? And I think that there's a lot of work to be done all the way through our school systems and so on about, okay, we say it, but how do we do it? You know, how do we make all of the kids within the narrow confines of our curricula? Okay, how do we get everybody in there and get creativity to be not the C word? You know, I mean, it's the C word and the I word, and they're only for the chosen few. Well, no, they're not. How do we get all of them to understand where their areas of creativity are? And I think we talk about it a lot, but I think we have to find ways of actually making it happen. And I said school, but I'm talking about postgraduate and our businesses too. How does everyone how can we get everyone to, how can we create a system where everyone has ways of understanding what their own personal creativity and contribution can be? That's what so I'm interested in the language of it and the definitions of it, and then the how-to of it, you know, and the what next of it. So, yeah, which is sort of from the ground, not up. It's right at the bottom there. Thank you.
Thanks, Glynis. I think that's it. It's the what next. It is the action. How do we support this accessibility, that it doesn't feel inaccessible, it doesn't feel outside of us, that
it doesn't feel elitist, that only some people get to do this, whereas no, we all share in this. How do we share is the differentiation. Sorry, I interrupted you.
No, that's exactly, well, this is great. The good thing about Zoom is they have solved the overlap problem with microphones. I don't know if anyone else noticed that. I did. It's like, great, we can finally overlap each other again. We start to share thought patterns, which happens on Zoom. It's so exciting, which is why I love these idea jams. And I think that is also part of this key piece is the connection that we as animals play. We had to be creative to be able to survive as a species. It is coming more and more to the fore as anthropologists, and we're looking at this incredible work coming out about the Neanderthals right now, and looking at the role of creativity in our survival as Homo sapiens. And that inherent ability is literally inside all of us. It is actually hardwired in our DNA. So, but it is this feeling that it is somehow unattainable or outside of or unreachable or only for a certain demographic or group of individuals. So when we're looking at this, so again, I put the question out there, and we may not have, it's not about sort of having all the answers now, but as a Canadian network that is trying to network and build this nationwide, hopefully global movement for imagination and creativity, what do we do? What is that action? What's the thing? Because we do come together, we do talk about it with fairly like-minded individuals. So what is the thing that what are those steps that we can take? I think that's where Gillian and I were like, what is this network? We say these words, but what's our action? What can we do? And I think we're open to those ideas. Lindsay.
I'm trying to think of the political kind of word for like you're talking about accessible, so that creativity is accessible, like so that we
Inclusive too.
yeah, inclusive. Anyhow, there's a word for it, but and it does make me think of leadership, which was mentioned earlier, because we have a huge wave of new leadership courses in universities, and it's a big popular thing. And I work with the Inclusive Leadership Cooperative, and we are advocating for making it an everyman possibility, just like we're talking about with creativity, that it's available, it's a title available for all of us. And one of the things that we talk about with leadership is some of the skills or the art of showing up, as something that is fundamental to leadership. And it's so easy to do, right? Well, I mean, it's not always easy, but it's simple, I should say. You just show up. And then you can do it more and more, or big and small. You can do it in all kinds of different ways. You could show up on the floor, you could show up on the ceiling, and it's unique. You bring your unique gifts and identify them as what they are. So that hearkening back to I think it was what Sharon said. And same with creativity. If we just bring our observation to who are you with your unique gifts in your creative life and your creative endeavors and efforts. Sometimes it's raising a child, it's the way you hang out the laundry, it's and just helping people to recognize their own creativity.
Thanks, Lindsay. Ian.
Thanks. And thanks for this amazing conversation. This is really great. And I apologize, I don't have a camera that works. So you just have to look at this fascinating photo of me standing in front of a structure. I love everything that people have said. I'm a creative person. If you know, I wasn't aware that there was such a conversation about this big C and little c idea, but it makes perfect sense to me. And I'm just going to put this forward as someone who maybe is culpable of it as well, as maybe some of the reticence of people feeling like they can be creative or have ownership over creativity is maybe on the creative community, where we have sort of termed it as a brand that we use for ourselves. And so we are kind of the gatekeepers in some ways, by saying, you know, I'm a musician, I'm a songwriter, you know, I get up on stage and I don't want necessarily everyone to know that they can all do exactly what I can do, you know, because that's how I feed my family, you know, and I know I'm being a little bit reductive with that, but I think maybe just to answer the question of where do we start with this, I wonder if maybe we start with just ourselves as creative people. And I love the idea, Lindsay, you hit on some of this as well, about the idea of creativity in everyday life, and maybe just allowing more folks to realize that what they do is creative. You know, like I have a father who's not an artist, but he is one of the most creative people I know, where creativity is basically problem solving, and he can look at a problem, either a math problem or a problem with his car or a computer, and he can fix that problem. And he has the patience and resilience and the skill set to sit down and look at it and use his massive brain to come up with a solution to that. And I think really creativity as problem solving is something that everyone has baked into their DNA, and not everyone is going to be Sidney Crosby, but you know, we can all learn to move a little bit forward and recognize what that creativity is. I'm just going to put that out there, and people can jump on that if they want. I hope that answered, or I hope that added something to the conversation. I've just been so fascinating listening to everyone else here. Anyway, thanks for letting me chime in.
Thanks, Ian. I think that is a really great point, is that it's everyday living. It is tapping into that potential. And it strikes me, as we were talking about that corporate world, Trevor had to step out, but that idea of what innovation can, you know, push towards in terms of monetary and an economic result, is tapping into imagination and creativity there's risk for chaos. It's less controllable. There's more potential for someone to branch off and do something different. And therefore, possibly we do struggle with not having the ability to push some of these programs with our schools. Because yes, I think someone had mentioned in the chat too, I think it was David again, it was just like, we have, or was Richard, we have to free our children. Our children need to have this way of thinking. But if too many of them have that way of thinking, then they go rogue, and they don't get channeled into what the economic structure of our school system actually wants them for. I've got Christine, and then it's over to Mary.
Thanks. I just think that maybe now, based on the conversation and where we're going with it in all these different directions, that if we ever did come up with a definition of creativity, it wouldn't be creative anymore. It would end up being something else. It would be what everybody can do at the same level, and just something, again, like my mind is all going in all different directions here. But Sidney Crosby, do we think he's creative, or is he highly skilled? I mean, I would say yes, he's creative. Everybody has that. But really, if everyone is creative, then what distinguishes one thing from another? And at the same time, if we do start defining it, then is it creativity anymore? So it just seems to be this big conundrum, really. But just with the word Sidney Crosby, I thought, yeah, okay, that was how many thousands of hours of practice to get to that level where people might see him as, a big C creative, or is he just highly skilled? Is there a difference? If you're highly skilled at something, then do we call that person creative? If it's intuitive, who was it? I think Linda or Sharon used the word intuition. How do all these words fit together? Because some of them, to me anyway, seem antagonistic. You don't often see them in the same sentence. So I don't know, really interesting. I don't know if I added anything at all to this, or just kind of have more questions about it.
Well, this is the great thing about the idea jam. It's completely anyone's game. This is why it's here, just to provoke and to have ideas. And Mary, yes. You're muted, Mary. Hold on. There you go. Press the button there.
Okay, great. A great conversation, and wonderful to hear everyone's ideas about creativity. So thank you to Gillian and Alexis for this topic this evening on definitions. I think, again, like Blaine was saying, and a number of us, we teach this kind of material in classes, and when we work with people all the time with this terminology. And again, when I think about creativity, I think about the most basic form of it is making a new connection, whether that's writing a sentence and putting words together, or it's bringing together different ideas to solve a problem, like Ian was talking about. It's when you play, and when people play, they bring new ideas together, they try new things out. And we take risks. As soon as we start to go out of the a straight path and try something new, then we have to use our creative capacity. So I think that we, as human beings, we have conformity as a capacity. We conform, and we also create. And I think that all along we're doing that. And it's become, we've kind of separated it out and as a kind of thing. And I think that's happened partly because of the school system that has emphasized conformity for 150 years. We've been forcing kids to learn in a certain way, and we haven't valued someone who comes up with a new solution, or breaks the rules, or takes a risk, or plays. We think of play as something that's not serious, and that's you're kind of breaking the rules all the time. So we live in a society that kind of is very rule oriented and very conformity based. So that's what distinguishes the creative, we keep saying creative people, but we have that capacity. So I see it as something that is there for for all of us. There's, like we can call it small c or big C. It's like ordinary creativity. It's happening all the time. And it's happening when we're making this idea jam, all these things, we're making something new, we're learning something new. So I think it's as basic as that, and that there's ways of encouraging creativity through various ways of, and you bring skills to a creative problem. Each of us brings a different set of skills. That's why the solutions are so wonderfully different. We bring different expertise, and we bring different things that we're curious about. So it's very hard to nail it down to a particular process. It's very individually based, but we do have that capacity. So again, I come back to like a very, very basic understanding of creativity as making new connections wherever that is. And it's not just in the arts, it's in all walks of life.
Amazing. Thank you. Okay, so we're going to run this right through. I saw you lower your handstand Baines, and you're going to have it back up there because you're going to help finish us out. Okay. So Ian, then quickly, then Linda, super fast. And then I'm throwing it to Stan for the last word. And then Jillian and I will peace out. Here we go. Ian.
Cool. Yeah. Thanks, Alexis. And thanks, Christine, for calling me out on Sidney Crosby, because as soon as it came out of my mouth, I realized someone's going to call me on that. But you know what? I'm going to double down on it, because I'm just going to go ahead and say that you can put 10,000 hours into something. And as you know, we've all heard the Malcolm Gladwell adage, but I will say, and I'm not a huge hockey fan, but I will say that someone, and I'm using Sidney as an example, but in order to play at a certain level and not just be someone in the NHL, but someone who is at the level that he is at, and I don't just mean in terms of fame and the amount of money he makes, but to be able to do, and I think this really plays out to the idea of creativity and there not being a general gatekeeper in terms of the trades that it applies to, the kinds of people it applies to, the walk of life, the school you went to. Someone who has the finesse on the ice the way Sidney Crosby does has to be creative, because it is such a dynamic game of hockey. It's never the same. It's you're always doing something completely different. You have to work with a team in a way that only the super creative people are able to actually take it to a level that Sidney has taken it to. So I was going to double down on that, and we'll leave that there. I know people might disagree with that, but I also, just one quick point, and I think the conversation about how do we allow this idea of creativity to spread more broadly. And I wonder, I'm just going to put this out there, if maybe the idea of this big C, little c is part of the problem. If there is such a thing, and I've heard lots of people mention, well, is that little c or is that big C, or these people big C, and is it not just all creativity? And I'm wondering if maybe just putting a label, because I'm not sure I even understand it, and I'm an artist for a living. I don't know what big C and little c is, and I think that serves me to not really make that general distinction between one or the other. And I'll just leave it there. Thanks, Alexis. Thanks for the conversation, everyone.
Awesome. Thanks, Ian. Okay, Linda, quickly, because we like to shut this down right on time and leave us all wanting more. Linda, do you have a thought?
Well, I just have a thank you to Gillian, because when I started my PhD on how teachers understand imagination as a teaching strategy, I wrote to her and she said, do you really want to define imagination here, or is it better to leave it open? And it was the best advice I could have been given at that point, because imagination is about openness. And if I had tried to define it at that point, I would have put a lid on my PhD. So thank you, Gillian.
Yes.
That's beautiful. Stan Baines.
Only thing I wanted to add, you asked for a solution. I think looking around the screen and listening to the very vibrant conversations we've had this evening, that's part of the solution, is continuing the conversation. I think part of what I believe we do well at CNIC here is that we put a place where everybody can speak. And even for the people that don't, you never walk away from here going, I didn't pick up something. So each time I leave, my creativity levels or my imagination possibilities increase. So as long as for now, we at least continue to keep coming back, this is what's kind of fueling my imagination fire. So thank you all for tonight.
Thank you for coming. It was great. I want to thank my partner and co-facilitator, Alexis, and every one of you for showing up with an open heart and an open mind.
Mhm.
Thank you so much, everyone. We are back here in February. Gillian, do you want to take 2 seconds and just
Yes.
tell everyone what's going to happen in February? Super kind of
Got-
cool coming up.
Very cool. We've got Dr. Annabella Kant coming, who talks about the body and all the ways in which creativity and imagination are expressed through the body. So I hope you come back and join us for that idea jam.
Wonderful.
You will see
Thanks,
you'll see all of our emails. Please spread the word. We've got a great group of people, and thanks so much to all my fellow CNIC folks. And it's 9 o'clock, so we are going to shut this down. Thanks, everybody.
Bye, everybody.
Have a great night.
Great night.
Bye. Bye.